Dr. Caleb Norwood's boots clinked against the metallic flooring as he stepped into the sterile confines of Habitat 3. Outside the dome, the crimson sands of Mars stretched endlessly beneath an ochre sky. Dust storms, laced with fine corrosive particles, had raged for days, their abrasive winds battering the reinforced structure. Inside, however, the hum of air filtration systems and the faint glow of LED panels created a controlled haven, a fragile lifeline on an otherwise inhospitable planet. Caleb adjusted his oxygen mask and surveyed the lab. Rows of equipment gleamed in the dim light. DNA sequencers, bioreactors, and containment chambers for the test subjects. At the far end of the room, Dr. Elisa Carver was hunched over a console, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Her dark hair, tied back in a loose ponytail, framed a face marked with equal parts exhaustion and determination. "Caleb," she called without looking up, "I think we've cracked it." He approached, glancing at the display. It showed a cascade of genetic markers, each highlighted in green. Elisa tapped the screen, zooming in on a segment. "This is the sequence we've been waiting for. Splicing extremophile DNA into the human genome wasn't enough. But these Martian microbes, they're the missing link. They've evolved to survive radiation, freezing temperatures, and low oxygen levels. Imagine what this could mean for us." Caleb frowned, his brow furrowing. "You're sure these organisms are safe? They're alien, Elisa. We have no idea what introducing their DNA could do to a human body." "We've run every simulation," Elisa replied, her voice edged with impatience. "The tests on organoids and mice have been flawless. Their cellular resilience is off the charts." Before Caleb could respond, the lab door slid open with a hiss. Dr. Amir Patel and biotechnician Mia Torres entered, their arms laden with equipment. Behind them trailed Mark Harrington, the team's head engineer, and Lila Vega, the mission's medical officer. "Are we finally moving forward?" Mark asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "Because if I have to fix one more power relay while waiting for results, I'm going to lose it." "We're ready," Elisa announced, her tone firm. "The volunteers are prepped for the first injections." Caleb hesitated, scanning the faces of his colleagues. 5 of them had agreed to be part of the trial. Elisa, Amir, Mia, Mark, and Lila. He admired their courage, but a gnawing unease coiled in his chest. "Let's proceed cautiously," he said at last. "We monitor every variable. If anything goes wrong, we stop immediately." The group dispersed, each taking their positions. Caleb watched as the serum, an iridescent blue liquid, was drawn into syringes. Elisa was the first to receive the injection, her expression calm, almost serene. The others followed, rolling up their sleeves and submitting to the procedure with quiet resolve. For the first 24 hours, the results were promising. Elisa's oxygen saturation levels improved dramatically, even when exposed to simulated Martian air. Mia's skin showed an increased tolerance to UV radiation, while Amir's muscle tissue demonstrated enhanced resilience under strain. "This is incredible," Lila said during the second briefing. "If these results hold, we could have the blueprint for human adaptation on Mars. No more reliance on bulky suits or limited habitats." But the excitement was short-lived. By the third day, subtle changes began to emerge. Elisa complained of vivid, unsettling dreams, visions of sprawling alien landscapes teeming with writhing, unidentifiable forms. She dismissed it as a side effect of stress, but Caleb noticed the shadows under her eyes deepening. Then there were the physical changes. Elisa's skin, once pale, now shimmered faintly under the lab lights, as if coated in a translucent film. Mia developed an unusual sensitivity to sound, flinching at the slightest noise. Amir's appetite became insatiable. He consumed 3 times his usual ration in a single sitting, his movements jittery and erratic. Could it be an immune response? Caleb asked Lila during a hushed conversation in the medical bay. Maybe, Lila replied, her voice low. But this doesn't look like any immune reaction I've seen. Their bodies are adapting too rapidly, almost unnaturally. By the end of the week, Elisa collapsed during a routine checkup. She convulsed violently, her back arching off the floor as an otherworldly scream tore from her throat. The team rushed to restrain her, their voices a cacophony of panic. When she finally stilled, her breathing shallow but steady, Caleb leaned closer, calling her name. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment Caleb felt relief. But then he froze. Her pupils were gone, replaced by inky black voids that seemed to swallow the light. They're calling to us, she whispered, her voice distorted and guttural. They want us to become more. Caleb stumbled back, a cold dread settling in his gut. Around him, the others exchanged horrified glances. The room, once filled with the hum of progress and discovery, now felt suffocating, oppressive. He knew then that they had crossed a line, one they could never uncross. Caleb sat in the dimly lit control room, his eyes glued to the monitor displaying Elisa's vitals. They were erratic, heart rate spiking and crashing, blood oxygen fluctuating wildly. The genetic markers on her blood samples displayed alarming mutations. He tapped at the keyboard, running yet another analysis, but the results were the same. The alien DNA was no longer integrating with her cells. It was overtaking them. Elisa's stable for now, Lila said from behind him, though her voice trembled. She stood at the observation window, watching Elisa's unconscious form strapped to the medical bay's examination table. Her shimmering skin had thickened into a translucent, jelly-like membrane, and Caleb could swear it pulsated faintly, like something alive beneath the surface. It's not just her, Caleb replied grimly, pulling up Amir's data. The symptoms were spreading faster in him. Hours after Elisa collapsed, Amir had started clawing at his own arms, muttering about something crawling inside. They'd sedated him, but his condition deteriorated even faster. The black veins that had begun creeping up his neck now formed a web-like lattice over half his face. "You think it's airborne?" Lila asked, her face pale. Caleb shook his head. "The mutations are localized to the volunteers. It has to be tied to the serum." Before Lila could respond, a sharp scream echoed down the corridor, followed by a crash. Caleb shot to his feet. "That's Mia," Lila whispered, her eyes wide. They raced toward the sound, their boots pounding against the metal floor. When they reached the storage bay, they froze. Mia was on the floor, convulsing, Her limbs twisted at unnatural angles, the bones snapping audibly under the strain. Her face was a rictus of agony, her jaw unhinging inhumanly wide as she let out an animalistic howl. "Help her!" Lila shouted, rushing forward. "Wait!" Caleb grabbed her arm, pulling her back as Mia's body spasmed violently. Her skin began to split, but there was no blood. Instead, thick, fibrous tendrils pushed their way out, writhing like the roots of some alien plant. Her eyes locked on Caleb, but they weren't Mia's anymore. Dark, glossy orbs stared at him, reflecting nothing human. She's changing," Caleb whispered, his voice barely audible. The transformation finished with a sickening crunch. Mia rose to her feet, her movements jerky and unnatural. The tendrils sprouting from her body writhed in the air, probing the space around her. Then she turned toward Caleb and Lila, tilting her head unnaturally far to one side. "Lila," Caleb hissed, tugging her arm, "we have to go, now." But Mia, or what was left of her, moved faster. She lunged, the tendrils whipping toward them with lethal intent. Caleb shoved Lila aside, barely dodging the strike. The tendrils slammed into the wall, leaving deep gouges in the reinforced metal. They ran. Behind them, Mia let out a guttural screech that reverberated through the halls, a sound that no human vocal cords could produce. By the time they reached the central dome, Caleb's lungs burned from the effort. He slammed the emergency lock, sealing the door behind them. Lila doubled over, gasping for air, her hands trembling as she braced herself against the wall. "What the hell was that?" she panted. "That wasn't Mia anymore," Caleb said, his voice hollow. "The alien DNA isn't just integrating, it's rewriting them, turning them into—" He trailed off, unable to find the words. "Into what?" Lila pressed. "Something else," Caleb said finally. "Something not human." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp banging on the door. Caleb glanced at the small window and felt his stomach churn. It wasn't just Mia. Amir was there too, his body half transformed. His arms were elongated, the bones visible beneath translucent, gelatinous skin. Tendrils sprouted from his shoulders, twitching erratically. Behind him, Caleb caught a glimpse of Mark, his face distorted, his mouth stretching into an impossible grin. "They're working together," Lila whispered, horrified. "They're no longer individuals," Caleb said grimly. "It's like a hive mind." The banging grew louder, more frantic. Caleb scanned the room, his mind racing. "We need to secure the lab. If they get to the life support systems, they'll force us out," Lila finished, her voice shaking. As they moved to reinforce the inner doors, the sound of metal groaning reached them. Caleb turned to see one of the exterior bulkheads bending inward, the creature's strength far exceeding what should have been possible. "We can't hold this dome," Lila said, panic rising in her voice. "We need to find a way to stop this, whatever it is, before it spreads beyond us." "I know," Caleb said, gripping her shoulders to steady her. "But first, we survive." The lights flickered and a low hum reverberated through the dome. The creatures had begun dismantling the power relays, cutting off their access to critical systems. Caleb and Lila worked in silence, their hands shaking as they fortified their position. As the hours dragged on, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded. like prey. Every time they moved, the creatures adjusted, anticipating their actions. The sense of dread deepened with each passing moment. The mutation wasn't just spreading, it was evolving. Continuation of the story, coming soon.